Hello and welcome. This is The Climb, an ESG Perspectives podcast brought to you by Snowkap in association with AdQuest. In this first edition of The Climb, we will be discussing the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM. And to help us do so, first up, we have Martin Malmros, the CEO and co-founder of Snowkap. With his passion for sustainability and a remarkable track record of driving change, Martin is an absolute trailblazer in the field. Next up, let's say hello to Anveshi Gutta, the CEO of AdQuest. Anveshi's expertise in sustainability consulting has been instrumental in guiding many businesses towards a more sustainable path. Thanks so much for joining us today. And now, without further ado, let's begin. This edition, we'll be discussing EU's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. I would tell you more about it, but luckily we're in the hands of some experts who would actually be in the best position to tell us much more about it. So without further ado, Martin, I'd like to begin by asking you, the most fundamental question that's on everyone's mind today. So what is EU's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, in short CBAM? Why is it being implemented? And what does it aim to address?
Well, we have to go back a bit in time and see what Europe is trying to achieve. So we've had something in Europe called the ETS, or emission trading system. That meant that high products with high embedded carbon in the actual products, like steel and concrete, the company has been given a certain amount of free carbon emissions that they can use per year, and if they use less, they can save it or they can sell it. It's become a trading mechanism. All of this is aiming to help Europe achieve the Green Deal, where the emissions are supposed to be reduced by 55% by 2030. Now we started to reach a phase where ETS are going to be phased out with 10% per year less, meaning you will not get any free carbon emissions anymore as a company. And then Europe, in all fairness, want to try to create a neutral, should we say, play field, so that if you produce steel in another country, or you produce steel in Europe, and you use a more carbon intensive process outside Europe, you will have to pay for that when the product enters Europe. And the initial kind of big sectors that will be affected is steel, concrete, agriculture, electricity, and a few others. So the carbon border adjustment mechanism is mainly aiming, and how it will be seen for companies who are selling their goods today to Europe, is that unless they have a carbon tax in their own country, unless they have a equal efficiency in terms of carbon production when it comes to carbon intensity, they will have to pay a carbon tax premium when the products enter Europe to keep it level in terms of how much embedded carbon is from a European product versus a imported product.
So thank you for that overview of CBAM. Anveshi, now to just take a deeper dive, so to speak. How does CBAM work? What are its key features? What products or sectors is it covering?
Yeah, so we'll get to the sectors and the products like you asked for in a minute. But just before that, I think what Martin mentioned, and I'll probably underline it and emphasize it a little more, is that I think the whole approach to CBAM is kind of having a two-pronged objective. The objective one is, of course, to create what is a level playing field from the carbon emission perspective. The second one talked about the fact that this whole climate change is a global problem, knows no boundaries, etc. Exactly that, right? I mean, Europe, of course, geographically has a boundary, but the whole conversation on carbon emissions and climate change knows no boundaries. So just because you've outsourced a part of your most carbon intensive process to another country, you cannot claim that you are running a clean company by yourself, right? And having said that, the sectors, clearly, I think they're very, let's say, aligned them with the ETS that Martin was mentioning. ETS was also primarily the whole aspect of free certificates, or the aspect of you having a ETS for yourself, or a leeway for yourself, was for a few sectors, and here as well. So the carbon intensive sectors like like steel, cement, aluminium. I'm even hearing hydrogen is coming into the mix now. So all of those are the kind of sectors that we're talking about. And again, because of the fact that such industries have supply chains that are much broader, from something imported in from China, from the east, which is China, going out as an export to the west, maybe all of it is important to be considered. So yeah, that way is geographically, again, it's impacting other countries as well, as much as it is being called an European regulation.
Absolutely. Actually, Anveshi, I'd like to get in a bit more with that with you in just a minute. But just before we do that, Martin, I wanted to ask you, what are the key features, and more than features, like what are the opportunities of CBAM, and do you see any challenges that could arise?
And there are several challenges. First of all, if we look at something like concrete and steel, which is around 75% of a construction capex, when you construct a new building, that's 75% is concrete and steel. There, CBAM is estimated to have about 15% increase in cost on steel, and that means for the total building cost will be up by 10%, which will drive inflation. That's one of the negative aspects of it, right? A second thing is that if we look at concrete industry, which has to move from coal to green hydrogen in its production process, that is not that very available at the moment, right? And that's also why CBAM has, I would say, some fairly long implementation process, right?
Thank you, Martin. Anveshi, like you were actually saying a bit earlier, right? Like also taking from what Martin was just saying as well. So the implementation of CBAM is expected to have a significant economic impact on India's exports of high energy intensive products, right? And looking at India specifically, I think Indian exporters are likely to face high prices and potentially lower demand for their products in the EU. What do you think are the specific implications of CBAM for Indian businesses, and especially those involved in exporting to the EU markets?
Yeah, the implications, going back to what Martin said, are the obvious ones, which is to say the prices will jump up. Okay, maybe not shoot up, but jump up for sure, in the sense that it all depends on how you're parallelly, as much as CBAM is coming your way, parallelly, how are you already looking at greening your own portfolio of products, right? We talked about avoid, reduce, and then remove as a step sequence to look at your net zero strategy. Here is an opportunity to look at avoid and reduce, because that is where I think the opportunity lies, if at all there is one, because of the fact that now when you cut down on the footprint that is going into the product while manufacturing it, that there is that much less of an impact on your product as you export it out there, because it carries a lesser carbon footprint to begin with. I think, the impact on the folks in India, especially the medium-sized businesses, not so much of the large and small, but the medium-sized ones, is significant, to the extent that I think the government of India has now started a negotiation with the European authorities. The Ministry of Commerce, Mr. Piyush Goyal, the Minister there, he's already been engaging in deep conversations with the European Union on the matter of this whole CBAM coming our way in October. In fact, very fortunately, so I would say India's resisted from going to the WTO for something like this, because yes, there is going to be an impact on trade, and typically any sort of a trade mismatch or a deal that is not in favor of both parties, they tend to go to the WTO, the World Trade Organization. But this time they said no, not for this one. We realize why EU is doing it. It's not because they want to hinder our exports. It's only because they want to kind of chart that path of sustainability. The only thing is, while you do that, while we chart the path of sustainability, we have to be aware that you're not kind of wrecking the ship at the same time.
Actually, my next question is very much related to what you were just saying, right? Like, I know you shared a significant point about accounting for the carbon, but how do otherwise businesses, both globally as well as Indian businesses, right? How do they sort of navigate and prepare themselves to the introduction of CBAM and ensure compliance, and hopefully more than that, right? So how do businesses approach this?
So now it's like a business case when you need to have financial data in order to evaluate. You need to have market data, right? Now we need a lot more carbon data. What is embedded in the product? You might need to do a life cycle assessment. You might have to implement a carbon accounting mechanism in your company, so you know where your carbon sits. Because what will be required from companies exporting to Europe in these categories is you will have to guarantee an assurance of compliance. You have to show that we can assure you this data is correct, that we comply, and that we have a correct accounting system. So and as I said, we have entered the carbon economy. And that means that companies now need to have control of their carbon on a detailed level. Sustainability has gone through the phase where we needed to do reporting of as is or what we believe.
Awesome. Thank you, Martin. Anveshi, I just want to continue on that thought actually. So, so to take it a step further, how can Indian businesses implement like robust carbon emission monitoring, reporting, verification systems? So how do Indian businesses do that?
Yeah, I don't think there's any difference between an Indian business doing it versus a non-Indian business doing it. Everybody has to do it the same way. So that doesn't differ anyways. Having said that, I think the first thing that has happened over this course of the last 12 months or so, 10-12 months or so, is that when we speak about the regulation, and we've spoken already about the BRSR, in there is a section in the BRSR report where it asks you already about what are your scope 1 emissions, your scope 2 emissions, and of course if you are having access to your scope 3 emissions also. The reason I bring that out is because the only way you could arrive at a product level footprint or rather a company level footprint is if you knew what your footprint for different products that you are manufacturing is. You got to really be aware of it to that extent.
I want to ask you, what role does collaboration play in terms of, specifically in terms of like technology or consulting, like solutions like Snowkap and AdQuest? How can they assist Indian businesses in CBAM compliance and generally enhancing their sustainability performance as well?
Yeah, I mean, what we can do at Quest and Snowkap is, of course, to provide the right set of data and the right set of guidance jointly. But what is happening now is that we start now to, should we say, tighten the bolt on companies, which will have to include improvements in their core processes, like production processes. What are they using coal or green hydrogen, for example? And that means a lot more companies, techs, need to be involved in a collaborative manner to solve these new challenges. It's easy to say we should not use plastic from oil, but what is the alternative? Do we have enough bagasse to produce enough packaging? Are they approved for food, for example? They are not in many cases, right? So there have to be a lot more collaboration and partnership between governments and between companies. So we will see a new, I would say, we used to talk about competition, then we have co-opetition, and now we probably have partnership in a much bigger way going forward. And this, I think, is very, very positive for, especially for Global South, which is the supply chain of Global North, where it's not possible just to go for the lowest cost anymore. You have to go for suppliers that think one step ahead, that invest in innovation, that invest in the greening of their products. And therefore that will, in my mind, lift Global South in terms of their manufacturing and value creation quite significantly.
Absolutely. Thank you, Martin. As we are rolling along in this conversation, Anveshi, I'm just going to bring back a little point that you sort of touched upon briefly a bit. Mainly, to put it very simply, like what policy responses and initiatives can support businesses in adapting to CBAM at the moment. I know that the government is doing some work, and you also talked about, a little bit of negotiation here and there, but can you elaborate a bit more on this point?
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking India again, yeah, we're talking India.
Yeah.
Let me tell you that I think the whole policy space that is probably relevant to the CBAM context is in a very flux mode at this point. The reason I say that is because there's a lot happening at the same time today. While there is a negotiation from a public policy perspective that is happening from a inter-country conversation perspective, there's also the whole regulatory mechanisms like your BRSRs that are coming in, including the fact that there is an emphasis now on something called the green hydrogen mission. We may be aware of that in India, that it is a large scale there's a large scale mission that has been launched around green hydrogen. The emphasis being on the fact that India has already progressed far on its solar mission, and green hydrogen mission by itself is dependent so much on renewable energy.
Awesome. Thank you, Anveshi. I think my last question is related to that. I mean, what in the context of CBAM, how do businesses thrive?
I think it's important to understand that there's a certain nervousness in Europe as well, right, among companies. If they used to buy, let's stay with cement for now, cement from a country outside India, and that company suddenly say, no, we can't afford to sell it to you anymore. It's too, we will lose money, so therefore prices will go up, right? Then you might have issues in Europe that arise from too high inflation, or the cost of the building doesn't match people's what they are able to pay in rent per month for a new build property, right? So there's a lot of nervousness here. Personally, I think we will move on from a CBAM to a global accounting border accounting mechanism fairly quickly, and otherwise this could prove difficult. But I'm still extremely positive about this implementation, because it shows the way forward, that there has to be a cost on carbon emissions.
On the Indian companies or the exporters, let's not say India, any exporter sending the products to the EU. Now, what happens with them is the fact that they are going to inevitably get working in terms of getting the footprint lower than where it is. That is important. Now, while that is inevitable, for the fact that the investors are already asking for it, now there's a case where your customer, in this case the European customer, is also asking for it. And then of course there will be the other aspects of the regulators and everything else. For the Indian companies who are not impacted directly by the CBAM regulation, there is possibly companies like the ones in green hydrogen, or for that matter the whole innovation ecosystem, whether you call it the startup industry or wherever, the green tech, the clean tech, the climate tech kind of ecosystem. There's enough and more opportunity now to kind of push for pilot runs, push for a small scale innovation, and then take it to the next level from there, so that it kind of addresses the issues that are plaguing or will be affecting the industries that are directly affected by CBAM.
Brilliant. That's the perfect way to end this podcast. I would like to thank both Anveshi and Martin for joining us today and for sharing your thoughts. Thank you to all our viewers and listeners for joining us today, and see you at the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you.